think when we even think about like the threat of AI, you can ask any question. You can get any answer. But the thing that you can't get is human story. We're in an external validation pandemic. When you think about how our world is set up to share and compare, it is unending. Our brain actually gets the hit of dopamine that we're looking for in anticipation of the result. So way before the outcome actually happens is when we feel the happiest.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Today, I am joined by Jess Ekstrom. Jess is the founder of Headbands for Hope and Mic Drop Workshop, an investor and woman, a Times best-selling author, a Forbes top-rated speaker, and most probably that pinnacle, she's a mom. New mom. She's working on her second, maybe by the airing of this episode, she will already have her second. Let me give a little more background. Since Jess started her companies, she's been featured in Today, Good Morning America, 17, Vanity Fair, Forbes, People, and more importantly, helped millions of women and girls worldwide. She's the best-selling author again of 2 books, Chasing the Bright Side and Create Your Bright Ideas. Her hobbies, I'm just going to skip to the one that I love the most, is searching for the best breakfast burrito in America. Okay, so I'm going to interject. We're going to start right here, Jess. When you and your husband, Jake, traveled the country in your RV, where was the best breakfast burrito?
It was right outside of Glacier National Park. And
that's close. That's real close.
Yeah.
That's like a short little drive for me.
I'm trying to remember the name of the town. I can find it, but it was just this little shack.
Okay, I need you to get that for me. A little shack?
This little shack on the side of the road. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, but it was so good. We went back there twice. And that's when you know it's good, when you make the trip again.
Yeah. I love a breakfast burrito.
So
it's
good.
just something that I always enjoy.
Yeah.
But yes, especially when it has like the tater tots or hash browns and a little bit of crunch with the bacon, eggs. I'm a bacon, not a sausage person.
We can agree to disagree there. Yeah.
But okay, that's fine. I mean, each to their own. I mean, yeah, I don't have hair. You make you at one point made headbands. Let's just full circle this. But I have to interject because as you share about that little shack, the best burrito I've ever had in my life was this little gas station. It was in the middle of the Central Valley of California, right on Highway 43, just south of Hanford. And you would drive up and you would have no idea there was even a little kitchen area in it. It was one of those, it was kind of dirty, right? But those are the best places to get burritos. I would go there. It was one of the most amazing burritos in the world.
Okay, we'll have to swap burritos stories then.
Yeah. We'll have to go on a road trip.
It.
Yeah. I'm excited to spend time with you. We've gotten to know each other earlier this spring, mutual friends. You actually referred one of our amazing speakers for the Impact Summit, Katie Casada. She's going to be, she's already been a guest on this podcast. Thank you so much for that. I can't wait for her to speak at the event. Let's get into you, right? I want to hear about you. One thing that as we were on the open, you said, hey, Tyler, I'm really excited about the Mic Drop Workshop. Headbands of Hope, that was a journey and a lesson for a while. I want to kind of go through that and say, how did you even get started on this journey where Mic Drop Workshop is a point in your life? So maybe going back into those early days, even before Headbands. Like what really drove you there?
Well, Mic Drop Workshop exists to help women become professional speakers. And I feel like my quote unquote speaking career began like teaching fitness classes in college, or I was like a campus ambassador where I would give tours. And I just realized that there was these like positions I could put myself in where I could essentially get more reps and just get more experience under my belt and get comfortable standing up in front of crowds, and what an asset that was. So then when I started Headbands of Hope, when I was in college, which we give headbands to kids with cancer, I had no marketing budget. I was 19. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, well, maybe I could stand up in front of my college classrooms and beg professors for like 5 minutes of time before they began class and tell students about what I was doing. And then I learned if I can not just like stand up there and give my elevator pitch of my business, but also share some takeaways of what I learned and how they can apply it, then I can get 10 minutes to speak in front of the class. And then if I can get good at that and make it an hour-long keynote, then I can actually get paid to do that, which was crazy to me. So I think, the evolution of Headbands of Hope and Mic Drop Workshop, something that I'm just kind of now seeing, being on the other side of it a little bit, is the way that Headbands of Hope was able to scale with like limited experience, no funding, was through public speaking. And then, as I continued to do that and realized just how male dominated the speaking industry was, that's when Mic Drop Workshop, came into existence 8 years after Headbands of Hope started. So even though they feel like maybe sometimes in my head two different journeys, they've really been one of the same.
I want to tie in partly, which I know makes a highly effective speaker, a highly effective communicator, is someone that can really touch emotions. As you share the stories, I've seen you speak and present, and you share this story about Headbands for Hope. There is an emotional point to that story. If we think about combining these two, how effective and important is touching emotions, not only to driving a brand, but also communicating with people?
Yeah. I think when we even think about like the threat of AI today, like artificial intelligence, it is like,
I like where
you
you're going.
can ask any question, you can get any answer. But the thing that you can't get is human story and that ethos that you get from hearing someone. I remember the first time you told me your story, and I was on the phone with you in a Jersey Mike's parking lot and being like, holy cow, this guy's amazing. And that's what speaking is about, using your human lived experiences to teach a lesson to an audience. And so when we think about like, how do we stand up against AI, or what do we have that it can't offer? I think at its core is our lived experiences and our ability to tell them, which is why I'm so passionate about helping women do that.
I think back myself, or I think as you go through the process, or you working with people, what's the challenge there in going to that emotional connection? Well, why do, when you're working with people, or even I can share myself, like, why do you see people that like, I don't have a story to tell, or maybe people won't, you can go through all the answers and I'll let you bring out those answers, but how do you work through that, and what problems do you see?
I'll tell you a story. The irony, I'll tell you a story to help explain this storytelling. So
Katie would be smiling.
Yeah, exactly.
Right now.
I know. She's the queen of storytelling. So we mentioned, being on the search for the next best breakfast burrito. That happened when my husband and I were in an Airstream trailer traveling around the country. One of the places we went to was this island off of the coast of Maine called Peaks Island. And we just did a little day trip there and took our bikes. And it was a small, tiny island, maybe like 2 restaurants. And I was looking at the map of what is there to do here. One of the things that came up was the National Museum for Umbrella Covers. And I was like, what is this? So of course I'm like, stop one, we are seeing what is the National Museum for Umbrella Covers. And we went there, and it was literally like, probably the size of your bathroom, this little room. And this woman had an umbrella hat on. You came in, she gave you, one of those umbrellas that goes in your drink. And then on the wall were all of these categorized umbrella collections. There was animal themed, there was political, there was even a closet that you had to be 18 or older for. I'll let you fill in the blank of what was inside that closet of themes of umbrella covers. And I was like, and this woman's been on NPR. She's incredible. I'm like, why did you start this? And she goes, well, one day in the 90s, it was raining. I took out my umbrella and I saw the cover and I just said, these are really great, useful, cute jackets that go on our umbrellas. Why aren't we talking about these? Why aren't we celebrating these? And so she did it almost as like a joke at first. And then it turned into what she says is a movement to celebrate the mundane. And I think that is, when we think about telling our story, one of the biggest hurdles mentally that I think we encounter is thinking that our story isn't big enough, good enough, emotional enough, powerful enough. And so then we don't tell it. Or why would someone pay me to speak if I haven't amounted to something so huge? And what this National Umbrella Museum was such a reminder of is like, no, we connect to each other based on the ordinary, not the extraordinary. It's really hard to relate to someone who is, one day I had this idea and the next day I can't, keep inventory in stock. And now I'm on Forbes top, $1 million people and all these, crazy accolades. It's really hard to be able to make that connection of like, oh, that could be me. But if you're connecting over authentic lived experiences, then the options are just limitless. And so I think what speaking is about finding the extraordinary in your ordinary. So like, what is your story? And where are the points and kind of those universal experiences or those lessons that you learned, whether it's something that's like getting cut from your middle school basketball team or, starting a business that's become your side hustle, or even, we've worked with speakers who have gotten let go from a job and found something else. There is meaning in all of it. And so speaking is not about how big your story is. It's about what you make your story mean for others. So I think if we can stop comparing and putting a measuring stick to our stories before we tell it and realizing that there is like, celebrate the mundane, then it can remove that hurdle in sharing our stories.
So I made some notes here. I want to go through these because there was many great lessons that you shared in that. The first one is what we see as mundane. You and I have talked about this. I don't think about my experiences as that big a deal. And you're like, oh my goodness, I was floored.
Yeah.
Right? You said that earlier. The next one is extraordinary is a separator. Ordinary is a connector. And it's finding ways to connect through the ordinary and expose the extraordinary. Right?
100%, yeah.
And then the last one, and I want to kind of go a little bit deeper here, is our A-R-E, right? I'm trying to enunciate here. Are our shameful moments comparatively shameful, right? Are moments that we just, I don't know about, shameful, and we think, ooh, I don't know here. And just kind of, those are the thoughts I got just from that story. And let's take us and let's go into that comparativeness of how difficult the comparative in my story compared to your story. And how do we work through that? How do you help people work through that comparative, I guess, pit?
First, recognizing, and I talk about this in my keynote now, that like we're in an external validation pandemic. I mean, when you think about how our world is set up to share and compare, it is, unending. It is what, how many followers you have or what your LinkedIn says, and everything is built for display, not for kind of that internal meaning. And so like social media has totally warped our perception of success. And I'm not saying that social media is the enemy, but I'm saying we just need to be aware that we're not seeing the full story when we look at those little squares or when we're scrolling on our phone before we go to bed at night. And so to understand that, hey, right now we're in a society and we're living in a time that has made us compare. And also like comparison and just that competition, recognizing that we're also hardwired that way. Like that was how we were built to survive, was feeling like there's only, one more dinner and we have to be the one to get it. So when we can recognize that that's how we were built and how we were wired, and also that's how our society is set up, that just gives us the opportunity to also like give ourselves some grace and be like, instead of being like, why do I keep comparing myself? Because it is human nature, and it is also in the most tempting environment in history that we're living in right now. So once we can understand those things, I think we can kind of learn where our pitfalls are. For me, it was setting like timers scrolling on my phone to know that I was not going to just like scroll into abyss. But then I think the biggest thing for me, and this was honestly when I became a speaker, is like you think that in order to do something, you have to emulate a person who's good at it. So if I want to be a speaker, then I have to go up there and be Mel Robbins, or I have to go up there and be whoever it is, XYZ, that I want to be. But you're never going to find yourself in someone else. Like you're never going to find your style by trying to impersonate. And so you can be inspired by someone without comparing yourself to them. And so knowing the difference of that feeling. For me, inspiration is proof and evidence that it's possible. Oh, wow, like she can do it, Mel can do it, I can do it too. Versus comparison is looking at like what you lack in comparison to what they have, and then making an assumption about it. I'm not on that stage, she is, therefore I'm worse. And so understanding there's a difference between inspiration and comparison, finding your own style instead of trying to emulate someone else, and looking at people who are successful as evidence instead of as evidence as to what's possible instead of evidence as to why you're not good enough. And I also just think like something I've been battling with recently as I'm turning away opportunities, like yours included, being in this postpartum phase and being super like tight about where I spend my time. There's a scarcity mindset that comes to that. You're like, if I don't say yes, then I'll become irrelevant. Or if I don't do this, if I'm not constantly seen, then will I be forgotten? And I think when I think about that, I have to remind myself that I don't think I will ever miss an opportunity that's made for me. And anyone who's listening, you can realize that you'll never miss an opportunity that's made for you. I would think about like, you hear these actors that turn down like these major roles, like, John Travolta turned down Forrest Gump, and, Paul Rudd was doing this interview where he turned down The Hangover, and the interviewer was like, aren't you kicking yourself? Aren't you, that was like the biggest trilogy of all time. And he was like, no, because the cast that was set is probably what made it successful. If I had been in it, it wouldn't have been that same cast. And so when you think about like things that, oh, I should have done that, or I wish I would have done this, realizing like that every decision you make in the moment is the right decision, no matter the outcome, because you made the information with what you had, and that you're just never going to miss a moment that's made for you. And so when you think about comparison and comparing yourself to others, like there's almost just this like relaxing where you're just like, what if I just trusted that I'm going to do what's right for me with the information I have in the moment, and that there's room for me at the top no matter how far I see someone else go, there's still room for me. So long answer to that question, but I think that there's like recognizing the external validation pandemic that we're in, and also some of the internal shifts of being inspired without comparing, is a really good step in the right direction.
See, we've spent enough time where you've gotten to know me well enough. I'm not going to ask you to be vulnerably real. You say all of that, and I appreciate that. That's on point. Where do you either currently struggle with that, or take us back to the Jess where you learned all those lessons and what you were wrestling with?
I currently struggle with that with motherhood. Because I always feel like I'm in the right and the wrong place at the same time. If I'm working, I feel like I should be doing this because I need to work, but then I also feel like I need to be with her, and vice versa. And so I think I struggle with this when it comes to motherhood, and when I see women who have made, maybe it just feels like more of a definitive choice, like I'm at home or I'm working or whatever it might be, even though I know it's just those little squares telling me that, it might look like they've made that definitive choice that they have no guilt about, but maybe they do. And so I know that for me in this new season I'm in with like motherhood, it's something I look at a lot more, and I'm trying to like retrain my brain in that way because I feel like I've gotten a good handle on it with work. But earlier with speaking especially, I mean, I had to, if someone was speaking on a stage that I hadn't been on, I would be like, why am I not on it? As if every opportunity was about to run away, like that there was a timer to it all and it all had to happen now. And I think now I've developed a lot more patience, and a lot more genuine celebration for people. When you celebrate someone who got something that you didn't get and it feels forced, you're just like, yay, congratulations. But I wanted that. I wanted that book deal, or I wanted this. And you don't really mean it. Now I feel like I'm at a point in my career where I do. I genuinely, even if it's something that I wanted, genuinely happy for the other person, but it was not always that way.
That last piece of celebrating someone, Hannah Pryor, who's been a previous guest, she wrote, a book about being, and she shares in there, celebrate people. And I think that's so hard when you're struggling with your own insecurities. I've been there at times where, I was riddled with envy and the insecurity because I didn't understand what I was uniquely good and valuable, what I had to offer. And I think as you share that last piece of, the book deal or whatever else, that you're able to get over that hurdle, how much of that became that you came to grips with who Jess was and what to offer people?
One of the things that we do in Mic Drop Workshop, like right off the bat, is we don't talk about like the audiences or the fees or whatever it might be. We create what's called a transformation promise, and we use the fill in the blank. And it's after people hear me speak, they will blank because my speech will blank. So after people hear me speak, they'll be inspired to have motivation that lasts because my speech is going to show them how to connect the dots to their purpose. And the reason why we do that, and the reason why it was so impactful to me, is because when you figure out the problem that you're solving for others, it becomes less about your ego and more about the problem. And so it became, why didn't they book me to speak? To, they just didn't need that problem at that time. And so I think like when it comes to celebration and comparison, realizing that when you are really clear about what you offer and you offer one thing and you do that thing really good instead of being this chameleon, it makes it a lot easier to not take things personally because you have done the work to separate your personal self-worth from your work, which was something I was terrible at in like the first 10 years of running a business. It was like my worth was attached to every high and low of running a business, which is just not emotionally sustainable. And so I encourage anyone who wants to speak or write or create something, or even in your work that you do, whether it's working for someone else, how do you become so enamored with the problem that you can remove your ego and your self-worth from the outcome of it? And that's something that I'm really exploring the past year or two. Yeah.
One lesson that I've learned from a friend of ours, John Maxwell, when he, they asked, like, why do you get up and write? It's the anticipation. And I recently, just in this last week, had a twist, and it was like, oh my goodness, I need to anticipate the outcome of it. And so even though I'm dreading doing it. I'm excited to do it because of anticipating the result and the response. And that idea of what you just said there last is when you can get to that point, even that painful or whatever it is, you can anticipate it because that problem, you know what that problem is. For me, the problem I aim to solve is insecurity. And so that can be real awkward talking about at times. But to me, I get excited talking about it because I know that when people are wrestling with it, that they're drowned in it. Like that first 10 years that you talk about in business, that you were just overwhelmed by it. And then all of a sudden you became like, no, this is the problem I'm here to solve for people. I'm here to help them tell better stories, to be able to speak in front of people with this confidence. I can only imagine when you do that in that anticipation, that it just makes life so much more enjoyable.
And it's interesting that you say anticipation, because there was this really interesting study that I'm using for the book that I'm writing about where we get the dopamine hit. And, dopamine is like the happiness hormone. It's the thing that we're searching for when we're scrolling on social media or when we interact with other people. How do we get that boost? And where we get it wrong, and this study at Vanderbilt showed, is we think that feeling is going to come from the outcome. We'll get that hit. Well, once I turn in the book, or once I see it on a shelf, or once I get that first gig, or once I launch my business, or whatever it might be, then I will get that feeling I'm supposed to feel. But what this study at Vanderbilt shows is that our brain actually gets the hit of dopamine that we're looking for in anticipation of the result. So way before the outcome actually happens is when we feel the happiest and when we feel the most fulfilled, which to me, like my interpretation of that is, well, how do we truly learn to become happy in the process and love the ideas of building and creating and the artistry of it, instead of waiting for the applause or the post or the outcome? Because we've all done it and we all realize that, oh, I didn't feel like I thought I was going to feel when that happened. So what do? We just go chase the next thing. And then that hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper and you're wondering why it's not filled yet. And so to realize actually the dopamine hit is in the process, not in the result, is like a huge revelation that we can consider as it comes to approaching our goals and our own motivation.
I think of professional athletes or endurance marathoners, that live for the training because they've understood that the event, the race, the match, the game is so fleeting and so, in some cases, out of their control that they yearn for the training. They understand they have to go through those, again, the championship games, the games, whatever it may be, the events, in order to, have verification for their training. But yet every day training, that anticipation of how am I going to get better today? And it comes back to our friend Jordan Montgomery has podcast Growth Over Goals. And when I adopted that from Mentor Maxwell, just like, don't be so focused on goals, focus on the growth. And like my anticipation, my drive each day is to be better than I was yesterday and doing all the things that I today so I can be better tomorrow. And once I embraced that, I didn't care about the ups and downs, right? Did I get that or not? Did I get recognized or not? Did I, have a confidence? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think you bring up athletes, which I think is so interesting when we talk about motivation, because it's in the most extreme cases. It's like, well, why would someone, Michael Phelps, like swim for as long as he did? I'm like, that sounds awful to me. And why would someone who's won an Academy Award keep acting? It's like, haven't you reached the pinnacle of what you're supposed to do and what you set out to do, or haven't you made it? And so it becomes like this question of what is like powering my motivation? Where is this coming from? There was this study around like types of motivation, and I thought it was interesting because it breaks it down in this way that I just never really quite thought about. And it is promotion-focused motivation is when you seek gains and aspirations. And then prevention-focused is when you're motivated by avoiding losses and obligations. So this idea of like, am I motivated to gain more or lose less? And it's interesting to think about like, why do I work? Why do I get up? Why do I do this? Is it so prevention focused to keep stability, or is it aspirational focus to get more? And I thought that there was going to be like one way that is better than the other, but it wasn't. It just said when these two compete with each other, when you feel them both at the same time, that's when things can get blurry and you wonder like, what are we even doing here? But no, like prevention focus or promotion focus, there's no like right or wrong answer. But I think obviously highly ambitious people are promotion focused. They're here for the gains. But that's also, I feel like some of the reason for the heartbreak is because there's always gains to be made.
With that backdrop, again, going back to you being vulnerable, I want to go back to something you said earlier. And when you said it, there was actually an individual who's done a lot of work for me. Her name is Amber Zarakor. She's actually done all of my website, Copper Heart Creative. And one day I had actually talked to her about you. She's like, oh, I love Jess's stuff, her book, Mic Drop Workshop. I think she's actually done part of it or maybe has heard of it. And we got in this conversation about motherhood. And she's a mom, much like yourself, of one. And she shared kind of some of the struggles that she shared. And we got into this conversation one day, and I took from that the perspective I've had working in network marketing with thousands of moms and seeing that struggle. And so I want to take that, what you just said, the promotion and prevent focused, and as well going back to the strategies that you've trying to work through so you don't fall into this comparison. And one thing that she shared, again, being a professional, is how do I do it all? Because the world creates this image that I should be able to do it all.
Yeah.
How do you do it all?
Well, I'll be honest. I think that doing it all is a load of BS because you cannot do it all at once. And that's like that was, I think, such a turning point for me where I was like thinking of my life more in seasons than one moment. Because it's really hard to see past the frame that you're in right now. Like when Ellie was born and I was waking up every 2 hours, it's like you think, this is what I've signed up for. Every night for the rest of my life, I will be up for 2 hours, every 2 hours. And it's really hard to see further than that. And when you start to realize like how quickly this is going by and how fleeting not just motherhood is, but just like moments are. And there are things like there's going to be a season where I'm going to be able to focus more on my like working out. Like I used to work out all the time. Right now, as being 8 months pregnant and maybe having a baby when this podcast comes out, it's not the top of my totem pole anymore. And I think that's really hard for women, especially high achieving women who, before having a kid, so much of their self-worth came from productivity, their accomplishments, the speed at which they did things, maybe their body. And all of a sudden, having a baby puts every single one of those things in question. And so everything that you just used to measure your self-worth is now at its lowest point. And yes, you have this amazing miracle that you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be the happiest I've ever been right now. Why do I feel this way? And of course, there's chemicals and chemistry and so much a part of postpartum that I definitely had as well. But the idea that someone's supposed to hand you a baby and everything is supposed to still be at its highest volume that you were doing in the past just doesn't make sense. And I think also I have the gift of like having an amazing, supportive and super active and hands-on husband. But at the end of the day, women, it's just the chemistry even of reproducing. Like the first 2 years, your body, your mind, everything is just different. And so even you can strive to be the most egalitarian couple where you're, both getting up in the night and doing all these things. But at the end of the day, there's still this major shift in you physiologically, mentally, that is just not talked about enough. And then I also think there's one of the things I personally struggle with and that I think a lot about when it comes to Mic Drop Workshop. Like, Mic Drop, we're existing to show women like what their potential is and that they can go out and speak on stages. And there's so many great women's movements and stuff that's doing things like this right now, where there's so many companies that are, showing like diversity and gender diversity at the top and hiring more women. But at the end of the day, it's like we can create more opportunity for women in the workforce, but that also means that things need to change at home and that things need to change with like expectations, of women. And so the helping women have careers that are thriving and strong, I'm just now learning is only a part of the process. Like, childcare and expectations and support is a whole other part of that equation that I really honestly didn't know or think anything about until it happened to me personally. So it's a lot. And I don't really have a solution other than I think talking about the problem is helpful.
Where do you find I found this within my wife and again, the community of network marketing. Maybe this is the same, maybe it's different. I found there was more pressure from peers or maybe a generation that had it different. More pressure, well, this is what it looks like. This is what you should be doing. And almost this internalized pressure of like, well, they're making it happen. This is what I should be doing. Than necessarily the situation that you and your husband are in. Like, right, you and Jake, you got it figured out, okay, do whatever. But what I saw was the outside pressure of, oh, this is what it should be like, that became most difficult.
What ways did that, like, can you give me an example of how that showed up for you?
Yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, it's like, well, you should be able to do all the laundry, clean all the house, watch all the kids, and make money, right? It's like, why do you have to do that? Or, one of the things that, we went through with my wife and I didn't come from this is the way it should be in a life. My mom was professional. She worked and, she helped our family business, our farm, but she also worked outside of that, partly to make ends meet because agriculture is tough. And I never had this image, oh, this is what a woman should do. Not my world. That just, my mom is very much I'm going to dare say pro-feminist. Great for her, right? It's really, that's what she's passionate about, right? So I don't have these ideas of like, well, this is the way it should, this gender should be that way. And, then I look at my wife and what she wrote, and it was not different dynamic, but she had to come to her own grips. What does this look like being a mom, being a professional mom? And she's like, I like being a mom, but man, I love being a professional because that's what I identify with.
I think you're so right. Is like, you can have your own individual beliefs around gender roles and how you were raised, what you decide with your partner that works. And also, I want to reiterate that, like, I don't think that it means that women should work in order to be equal. I think it's just that you should have the choice if you want to do that. But you're right. It's what people say that you should or shouldn't do, or even just the hints and notes of how you subconscious. Like, okay, if you speak a lot, has anyone ever asked you like, well, who's taking care of the kids?
So I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I've actually had that discussion at times with my wife where, even so weird, it's like, well, just like if she goes somewhere, it's like, oh, Tyler, you're with the kids. Like, it's not a big deal either way.
Yeah.
Like, we just make it work. It's not this like, oh goodness. She, for example, she was recently on a business trip and people are like, oh, who's helping with the kids? And it's like, we have a 17-year-old, almost 16-year-old at that point, and a 14-year-old. Like, they're pretty self-sufficient. Like, dude's good. Like, really. And like, if I were to go somewhere and they wouldn't ask, oh, who's helping Kelly? So that's again, I think it's so subconscious, and that's where the challenge lies. How do we address that when it's not like so clear? And again, coming back to some personal strategy, how have you addressed some of those things? Either how have you addressed those? How have you and Jake addressed those? When you hear them from the outside or feel them from the outside, it's like, is this a deal for us? Because
it's such a good question.
Right?
And, I feel like there's an opportunity to call people up. You don't always have to call people out. And I find that when I'm in those situations where someone's like, oh, is your husband babysitting, this weekend? Not making someone feel stupid, but just saying, yeah, he's their dad and we do this together. I think that there's also some other things I've learned too, where I had this fear of, not the first time, but the second time, sharing my pregnancy publicly because I thought people weren't going to come to me with opportunity. And that is a fear that my husband has never had because it's treated differently. No one's asked him about what his paternity, him and I work together in business, and no one's asked him what his plan is or how much time he's going to take off or how he's recovering or anything like that. But all day long, well, what's your plan? Are you going to be speaking? Are you going to be doing this? And no, I didn't bring this to you because I knew, again, even talking about your event, and you didn't do that, but it was just.
Well, look, I would say I had to. Like, and it wasn't like I wanted to be cognizant of it just because it was the reality and not a, hey, oh, well, I'm not going to bring this up. But it's here's the difference is if you avoid it, it's almost as bad in our society. It's come as if you address it. And it's like, let's address it. Like,
address it.
It is what it is.
And then,
yeah, it's okay. I don't think less. It's just, let's understand the dynamic here.
I totally agree.
Right?
I think it's coming from a place of understanding, but not assuming. And that's where I think a lot of people get wrong when talking to women who are pregnant or something at work where, oh, well, I'm not going to put you on this project because you're, expecting or you can't handle it or you have a lot going on. I feel like more driven and like more powerful than ever after having a kid. Like, granted, being 8 months pregnant, my pregnancy brain right now is not the best example of that, but I feel like I am more capable than I ever have been before. And so for someone to make the assumption of like, well, can she do it? Can she handle it? Let that be up to me or let that be up to the person. But there's a lot of assuming going on. And I think it comes from a place of care. But what they don't understand is that it ends in a place of, inequality, to be frank. And so letting women be able to like make those decisions and say, actually, no, I can do this instead of just assuming, I think is another like subtle note of how can we help in this process and avoid making assumptions on behalf of women when sometimes we're at our best in these scenarios.
One thing I want to share with you, and I shared this with Amber, and I want to say, whatever you pick is right. Don't let somebody else decide, should you have somebody watch your kids or not. I mean, my wife will joke around and say, hey, our kids learned more Spanish than they realized watching Dora as she was building our business, building her business, building the business, right? And it's okay. And I will share this, and I will share this with you, and I hope other people listen to it. It was a couple weeks ago. So my son just turned 16 last week. And so things are changing, and we're driving, and we just got home from spring break. He said, Dad, you know what I'm really thankful for? Like all the trips we've taken. And we've been blessed. We've been able to take a lot of trips through our business, a lot of opportunities. He's gotten to do amazing things within some of his sports. And he goes, man, I'm so thankful because my friends, they've only been on like 3 or 4 trips. And I told him, it's like, hey, buddy, when I grew up, I only went on 2 vacations. One when I was 8, one when my parents sold the farm when I was 14. That was it. And he was thankful of it. And his now worldview is totally different. Why? Because my wife was willing to invest her time into something that changed our life, that gave me the opportunity to be here. And so as I share that story with you and with everyone else, is don't worry about what other people are saying. I said, figure it out for your family. And you can balance it out. Now, at the point in my life, we talk about travel limit. Yeah, I've limited. I don't want to be gone. I want to go somewhere with my kids. That's what my wife and I talk about. And I think that needs to be more celebrated than how many road trips am I going on. I have friends that speak that, are forced to because it's their business on the road every week. For the first 4 years of my son's life, I was gone every week, or 1 week a month, before, whether I wanted to or not. Let me get it out. I missed an entire year of his life. Well, stop and think about that. You might have too. But it doesn't show up as much when we stop and realize, is that what we want? And so I encourage everyone else, figure out what works for you. Don't worry about what your peers, don't worry about what a different generation says, wow, it should be this or that. If it works for you, great. But make sure you focus on the people most important in your life. And I would say that's your kids and that's your husband. Everyone else, if you're aiming to serve like earlier, solve your problem, you'll be there to serve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are in, talking about this like external validation pandemic. It's the same with like being in an overconsumption of knowledge where we think I have to do what this influencer, how she's designed her life or how this person has designed their life. And one of the things I learned, especially with parenting, I was consuming every single article about eating, sleeping, bowel movements, just everything. I was like, what, I need to learn it all. And I learned like if what you're doing is working for you, then you don't need the resource. And so it is so easy to just like keep consuming and just like overdo it. And if what you're doing is working for you, then you don't need the resource. So I think what you're saying is like so spot on, is just like figure out what your family needs. It's not going to be copy paste for everyone else. And then don't feel the need to consume information or consume from other people what you should be doing if what you're doing is working for you.
I'm actually going to use that. I have a keynote in a few
weeks.
Go
for it.
It's wrapping up, closing an event, and I'm going to use that because it's so
Go
good.
for it.
Thank you, Jess.
Yes.
Hey, where can people learn more about you, everything you do, everything you are? Where can people find that?
Well, if you're interested in Mic Drop Workshop, you can go to micdropworkshop.com/speaker is our free training if you want to start there. And then for me, you can go to my website, jessekstrom.com. But I will tell you my favorite place to meet people. I send out a hype text every Monday at 11 a.m. with like a quote, a nugget, something to think about. And so you can text me the word hype to 704-228-9495. And that is where I love to, and I actually that's me on the other end. So I read it. Sometimes I can respond when I have time, but would love to hear what you think of this episode too. So shoot me a text.
I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And thank you for all of our viewers and listeners. Thank you for being here, making this episode what it is. Remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then by rating and reviewing each episode, you can help more people find impactful leaders like Jess. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.